To recap, last week we talked about how to do the daily office in the prayer book, the morning and evening prayer. I wanted to kind of do some housekeeping things before we jump into the history. I wanted to show you guys some resources that you can use at home to supplement your devotions on the daily office. So there is a really neat website called the Cradle of Prayer. I don't know if you guys have heard that one. It's cradleofprayer.org. And this is a 1928 morning and evening prayer laid out during the week. And there is, I believe, 2 priests that monitor, record their programs. And then there's a lady who's the cantor. So at the canticles that we were talking about, and like we do here at Christ Church, we chant the canticle. They do that in this recording. So if you're, rushed for time, or you don't feel like opening the prayer book, you can go to this website. And number one, it tells you the proper for the week. It's the ordo. Like here we're in the 3rd week after Easter. And it's laid out. Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Monday morning, Monday evening, all the way down to Saturday. And not too long ago, it was just strictly recorded. So recently they added this tab over here. It says read along. So what you can do is click the play button, and then you can click on it and actually follow the service as being recorded.
What was the name of the website?
Cradle of Prayer.
Cradle of Prayer, okay. .com, I suppose.
Yeah, .org.
Or .org.
And what you would do to go to this page, you click on this week's prayers, and it will take you to this menu. Now, you notice here, some of these are longer than others, and that's because the people that run this site, they do abbreviated of the daily office, and sometimes they'll add those extra prayers that we do, like to the president, to the clergy. Those are supplemental prayers that they might add throughout the week. Then every once in a while they do a litany, which makes it longer too. So anyway, you have that. Another resource you can go to, this is run by the Anglican Province of America, but which is funny though, the APA is a missile Anglican church, but the website here is strictly prayer book. There's no missile stuff in it. So it's called commonprayeronline.com, and I actually know the fellow that put this together and manages the site. So he does it by, you can click on morning or evening prayer. I'm pretty certain that when you type in the URL, it should take you to the current day of the week instead of having to go look for it. And it's all laid out. You have the an opening sentence you can pick from, the long or the short introduction for the confession, the absolution, Lord's Prayer, and so on. So it's all laid out there for you. You don't want to read the prayer book, or you might want to use this to help guide you on where to point the prayer book. That's another option. So there's the 2 1928 websites that you can use. All right. Anybody have any questions before we jump into history? Okay. And I think maybe what I'll do is, maybe this Sunday I'll print the order of morning and even prayer that we talked about last week. I can put the resources that I mentioned on the back, or something on the sheet that we can give out, or have them out there for people to pick up. So does that sound okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I'm not used to using Google Slides, so pardon me. So, during the first century, up to Jesus' time, the Jews prayed generally 3 times a day. You had the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th hour. So you all might remember in the Passion of Jesus, we hear that Jesus died on the 9th hour. And that doesn't mean 9 o'clock. It means 3 o'clock. So the 3rd hour would have been 9 o'clock, the 6th hour would have been noon, and the 9th hour would have been 3 o'clock. And it continues on beyond that. But those are generally the hours of prayer in the Jewish community. So those of you that might recognize the Didache was one of the earliest writings of Christian discipline, as it tells us how baptism was performed, what they did for the Eucharist, the instruction to early Christians that they would give outside of the Bible. And the Didache also showed that the Christians prayed. They may not have used the Jewish prayers, but they followed the same time of the Jewish time. Okay, so why do we talk about martyrdom? So martyrdom, I will see further down the presentation, really will set us up for the forces that come together to produce the hours of prayer. So, this is a neat little trivia. Who can tell me who the first Christian martyr was?
Andrew?
Stephen.
Stephen.
Yeah,
Good.
Stephen.
Do I get another piece of banana bread from that?
Was that?
Do I get another piece?
Yeah, help yourself. So yeah, Stephen was the first martyr in the church. All right, so during the Roman occupation up until when Christianity became legal in the Roman Empire, we had various Roman emperors who had series of persecutions against the Christians. And as you can see, what I highlighted was not the date of the rule, but the general date of the waves of persecution. So while there were persecutions throughout from the 60s up to the 300s, they kind of came in waves, and some of the worst persecutions were under Marcus Aurelius, Valerian, and Diocletian. Diocletian, at the end, made it illegal to be a Christian, whereas previous emperors, you had to pay homage to the Roman emperor, and that was in conflict with Christian teachings, and that Christians believe that they should pay homage to Christ, not to the emperor. Emperors would. So the cult of the emperor was they never professed themselves as God, but they saw themselves as God's agents on earth. So they were like sons of God. And so anyway, when you paid homage to the emperor, you were in effect paying homage to the gods, which obviously Christians couldn't do. So throughout those years, here's a list of some of the famous martyrs in the church. This one I put an asterisk up here. And St. James was the first apostle to be martyred. And so we have 9 apostles. I want to draw your attention, there should be 10 apostles. Remember, there's 11 apostles, and Judas hung himself, so he was not martyred. But who is not martyred here? So if we have 10 apostles, we're missing one. So who is not martyred? Do you remember in the Bible?
St. John.
What?
St. John.
Right, St. John. St. John was not martyred. The other apostles were. So that's why I took the actress. Good for you. All right, Peter. We know that we're pretty, from the sources, traditional sources, we're pretty certain that Peter was martyred under Nero in 64. Paul may have been in 64 to 67, we don't know. A kind of open question. And then we have the various other ones. St. Ignatius was the one that said something to the effect that we were all Catholic universal. So he's the first person that said that. Justin Martyr is known for copying transcript from the Hebrew to the Latin that would be used to help us get the Bible that we have. And that's about it. Alright, so the reason that I mentioned the martyrdoms is the martyrdoms early in the persecutions, people fled. They fled looking for places of refuge from the persecutions. And so people went out in the desert. And you can see St. Paul is generally in the tradition of monasticism, or one of the first monastics. But here is what you would call a hermit. He just went out, had no followers, out in the desert by himself, fighting the demons within himself. Saint Anthony of Egypt is a famous, he's kind of known as the grandfather of monasticism, and also a hermit. And these people were focusing on prayer, work, fasting, and self-denial. Saint Anthony of Egypt, while he was a hermit, people brought food to him because he was known for not feeding himself, because he was trying to, inflict fasting on himself for devotion. And so he slowly attracted people that would come to bring him food, and then pretty soon they realized they had a holy man here. And so eventually St. Anthony had quite a big following of people. And it's funny though, St. Anthony never really wanted to be surrounded by community. He still wanted to be a hermit. So he kept retreating further and further, and people kept following him. So, St. Pachomius is the first person who is what we think of monk today, where monk live in community and share. And so that's what we call a synovitic community. And Pachomius wrote a rule for this monastic community. And if I remember right, he had 12 communities and 12 people, so that the number 12 was very important to him. And as we can see, the number 12 is important in the Bible for, the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. And that's kind of where they based their numbers from. So, Pachomius developed hours of prayer, and he followed as we saw, the Jewish third, sixth, ninth hour, although he didn't fix it on those hours, but he followed the 3 prayers of the day. And he added vigils, which was like a midnight prayer. And so he dictated in his rule that there were 12 prayers, they would say 12 prayers for each of those times. Okay, so, in 312, well, let me back up. So up to this point, the Roman Empire was getting so big and there were so many forces, invading on the edges. And so the emperors, and also there was a lot of infighting. So the emperor split the empire from east to west, and then split it again. So now there were 4 quadrants of the Roman Empire. And Constantine the First was one of the 4 emperors that managed the empire. And eventually there was fighting, and Constantine was able to overrun the other 3 quarters and unify the empire. Well, there's a famous battle, the Milvian Bridge in 312, and at Milvian Bridge he has this vision from God that he will conquer in the name of a symbol which we know as Chi Rho, which is an X with a P in it, and that is the first 2 Greek letters of Christ's last name. Well, Christ doesn't have a last name, but we call him Jesus Christ. So, he wins the battle, and in 313 he issues the Edict of Milan. And the Edict of Milan didn't make Christianity the sole religion in the empire, but it made it legal to practice Christianity. So you have to remember that you didn't Christianize the empire, but he allowed it for the first time to be practiced in the Roman Empire. Okay, so over time, the emperor, there's debates about whether the emperor was a real Christian, because he was still practicing pagan practices and supposedly converted on his deathbed, and so, I think the verdict is out. But anyway, eventually Christianity was becoming popular, and pretty soon everybody was a Christian. And looking back at the martyrdom and monasticism, now as everybody's becoming a Christian, it's starting to feel like a cheap religion. And a lot of people, a good number of people, felt the surest way to get to heaven was to die for your faith as a martyr. Well, when Christianity becomes legal, the martyrdom pretty much stopped. And so people are like, well, now what? How do we get to heaven? So that's where monasticism comes into play. And so even more people fled into the deserts to be martyrs, how do I say it? But even while they're not being persecuted for the faith, they're persecuting themselves in lieu of that to increase virtue and whatnot. Does that make sense? Okay. Alright, so in the monastic tradition, we have Pachomius, who in 300 set up celebrated communities. And by 400, we have Saint Benedict, who took more or less what Pachomius had done. And there were rules here and there that kind of took inspiration from Pachomius. But Saint Benedict put down his own rules for his community. And in 530, he comes out with a rule, and he's the first person to more or less standardize the hours of prayer, if that makes sense. He formalized a service of praying the hours of the daily office. And he developed 8 hours of prayer based on the Psalm. So as you remember from Pachomius, he had the vigils, and this is where they're getting that from. At midnight I would rise to give you thanks. And Benedict added 7 times a day I will praise you, and hence that's where we get 8 hours of prayer. Does that make sense? Okay, so Benedict having they were sayings of the desert fathers and mothers of the monastic period way back in the 200, 300. And so Benedict wrote in his rule, you know, these people prayed 150 Psalms in one day. But for you guys slackers, we'll let you do it in 1 week. so that's a lot to do for even a lay person. So in the standardization of the daily office, this is the daily office began to be centered around the Psalms. So these are the 8 hours of prayer. We have vigil before sunrise, so it was dark, and in the medieval periods, they would get up around 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning to pray vigil. That's pretty rough. Then they would have lauds, this is done at sunrise, and prime was prayed before work. Terce was a mid-morning prayer, sec was noon, noon was a mid-afternoon prayer, and vespers was an evening prayer. You might have heard vespers in the Anglican tradition, so that's where it comes from. And compline was a nighttime prayer. So something I learned about the English noon, the word noon, in the monastic tradition, particularly in the summer, sometimes they would pray noon closer to noon. And that's how the English associated noon, the prayer of noon, with noontime. So that's where we get noon. Isn't that cool? Okay, so we have a first standardization of the daily office under Benedict. And the clergy, if we read Benedict's rule, Benedict makes references to a secular hour of prayer, but it wasn't standardized. And so when Benedict came out with his standardization, the secular, the clergy and the secular, how do I say that? So like people who were in the cathedral, canons, secular clergy, people who taught in universities, those type people would be secular. Non-religious meaning that they don't take a vow in a monastic community. So the secular office took inspiration from Benedict. And so they copied his 8 hours of prayer. And in the monastic tradition, so if you remember, Paconius had a fixation with the number 12. So in the vigil's office, there would be 12 psalms prayed. And in the secular office, initially they did the same thing. Only later in the early 1900s, they changed it to 9 psalms instead of 12. But they copied pretty much what Benedict did. So in the secular office, they're still playing 150 psalms in a week, but they're doing it in a different scheme. So Benedict, what is interesting is if you read the rule of Benedict, he doesn't say what his Psalter scheme was. It was not, reading Psalm 1, 2, 3, 4. It wasn't reading it right through. But he changed it according to the times of day. So there were some psalms that were better associated at different times of day that he would change the order so that it felt more appropriate. So you have the scheme A with the monastic, then you have like scheme 2 with the secular. So they didn't use the same scheme as the monastic, but they changed it, but it's still 150 psalms in 1 week. So one of the reasons that Benedictines are really important in England is that it spread. So under Pope Gregory the Great, he is credited with sending the first Archbishop of Canterbury to England. So we have Augustine of Canterbury in 597 with a benediction. And so the legend goes that Pope Gregory saw some angels from England being sold as slaves. And he thought that their countenance was like angels. And so he said, we shouldn't call these people angels, we should call them angels. And so that's the tradition there. Anyway, so he sends St. Augustine to England with a benediction, and he brings with him the word of Benedict and the prayers, and slowly starts spreading in was the old province of the Roman Empire. Then in 1066 we had the Battle of Hastings, and William the Conqueror was looking for something to help unify England in the spiritual realm. And he looked at various rules, and he was really impressed with Benedict for stability and continuity. And so he, as another reason, that propagated benedictions in England. Over the 10th and 11th century, there were monastic reforms. There was a group called Cluniacs in France, and they spread into England. And then Cistercians, you might have heard of Cistercian monks or nuns. Cistercians were complaining against the Cluniacs and against Benedictines that they were getting too lax in their monastic discipline. And so the Cistercians were saying, we need to go back to basics. We need to go back to what Benedict had put out under rule, to pray, work, and study. So then we have the Reformation. And King Henry broke away from Rome and confiscated all the monasteries and their money. So up to this point, people who joined the monasteries, monasteries grew wealth from people who joined monasteries and gave their property and wealth to the monasteries. That's one way. Or you'd have people that wanted them to pray for them when they were dead. So they would give them, a gift or whatever. So that's how monasteries grew in wealth. And pretty soon, the king wanted that money. And so he shut down all the monasteries and confiscated their wealth. So you have to remember when King Henry broke from Rome, that if he were to come back today and see Anglicanism as we know it, he would not have recognized it. There was no such thing as Anglicanism even when Henry had broken away. He would just simply declare himself the head of the church, and it was still Roman Catholic, even though he was the head of the Church of England. So after he died, his son Edward VI come to the throne, and so Protestantism was spreading in Germany and Switzerland, and they grabbed a hold of Edward, and Edward was a young boy when he came to the throne. And the Protestants were saying, we want reform in England. And so Thomas Cranmer, you might recognize him, got on the wagon. And so he is the one that wrote the Book of Common Prayer. So in 1549, he publishes, for the first time, a Book of Common Prayer. And so in the Book of Common Prayer, Cranmer took the secular office, which had its inspiration from the monastic office, and he pegged the 8 hours of prayer that we saw down the church. So now we're not going to pray 8 times a day, we're going to pray 2 times a day, morning and evening prayer. He took inspiration from various sources, including the Psalm writing. The Psalm also had a breviary at this time under Cranmer, And he, took the, prayers that were in there. You gotta remember, prior to Cranmer, there were various, under the, 1500s, there were a lot of English Bibles in the vernacular that were starting to be printed. And one of them was the Coverdale Bible. So when Cranmer was putting together his, daily office, he ran into a, bishop who had influence in publishing the Coverdale Bible. And the bishop was like, why don't you use the Coverdale Psalter from this, Bible? And Cranmer's like, yeah, I'll do that. So that's how we get the Psalter that we have in the 20s, the Coverdale Psalter. So the morning and evening office was, in Cranmer's day, meant to be prayed communally. So if we were gonna do what Cranmer did, we would all come back here, morning and evening, and pray the daily office. That's how it was done. It was not done devotionally at home. So, obviously the European churches, the church was the center of town. And, but Cranmer's not the first one to do this. This has been going on in the cathedral, probably in the late medieval period, where church people were starting to come to the churches to join cathedral for prayer. So Cranmer wanted to increase biblical literacy among the clergy and laity. If we look at the monastic office and the secular office that existed prior to the prayer book, it was not full of biblical reading. Now, I add a little caveat to that. In the Latin, on Sundays, on feast days, and during the week, burial office, as they call it, they would take a reading from the Old Testament. Now on Sunday and Holy Day, that reading from the Old Testament would be supplemented with a reading from the Gospel and a reading from what's called patristic reading. So patristic meaning the church fathers. So there would be a reading from one of the church fathers. So by the time of Cranmer, he got rid of the church father reading and decided to produce a lectionary, as you guys talked about last week. The lectionary he chose was based on the calendar. So he would start at Genesis like on January. And you would go through Genesis, first January, second January, until you get to the next one. And just keep reading through the Bible in a year. That was his approach to the lectionary. And so you have to remember there were two readings in the monastic and secular offices during the week. So there would be what's called a short reading, and then there would be a very, very short chapter that was read. But that's nowhere near the biblical amount of reading that Cranmer introduced into the office. So what I'm trying to say is that Cranmer wasn't inventing something new. He was just taking some of the best of what was there and condensing it into a abbreviated form. Does that make sense? Okay, so morning prayer, he took the confession that we have. Confession was generally not part of the 8 hours of prayer, but they were kind of devotional, and they had crept into supplementary books, and that's where he drew the confession from. So instead of having the 1 week Psalter, he developed a monthly Psalter. So if you look in the prayer book, it will tell you the day of the week of the month, and it's divided between morning and evening prayer. So you can, pick what day of the month, you wanna read for the Psalter, and you would read that assigned psalm for morning, and then the psalm for the Te that we, have in the, morning prayer, we took from the office of, this is incorrect. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, from Matins, which is, from Vigils, which is sometimes later called Matins. The Benedictus is a canticle that he took from the Laud, from the 8 hours of prayer. So when these references here are for the 8 hours of prayer. So that's what I'm trying to show where they come from. Lord's Prayer, obviously throughout both Matins and Lauds. The suffrage was from the commons. There was a common that was said for Lauds and a common said for Vespers, but they would follow the same thing for both. And the same for the prayers. And then for the evening, again, devotional, commons, monthly psalter. The Magnificat came from the Vespers. The Nunc Dimittis. In the monastic tradition, Nunc Dimittis was only said once a year. In the secular office, they said it every day. Lord's Prayer from both, and the same for the suffrage and prayers. Okay, so I wanted to show there's a website that you can actually go, if you want to go back and pray all 8 hours, you can do that. But I just wanted to show you, this is this Mountain? Yeah, this is Mountain. So, so this, you know how we have the Venite? This is Psalm 95. Venite in the prayer book is a combination of, well, that's something that Cranmer did. He cut, well, actually I took it back. Cranmer, that wasn't under Cranmer, that was something done that, with, you know, the revisions of the prayer book. And over time with the revisions, they revised 95, Psalm 95, to have a supplement of 96 to form the Venite that we have. So, in the monastic and secular offices, the psalms were broken down into nocturnes for matins. And so there would be 6 psalms, the Lord's Prayer, and then there would be a reading. And the readings, the Old Testament reading was broken into 4 readings. So if you took a reading like we would do for the lectionary, they would just take that reading and break it down into four different sections. So after you did the first reading, then you do another nocturne of 6 psalms, so that's 12 psalms. And then you had the Lord's Prayer. And then you had a Te Deum. And this prayer, that's the prayer, the collect of the day. Okay, let's open up Lauds. So I'm going through this so you can see where the prayers are coming from pre-prayer book. So even though I had the monastic office opened up, it was the same thing in the secular office, even though I had different psalter schemes. So in Lauds, they had an Old Testament canticle. So in the prayer book for morning office, all the canticles are related to the Old Testament. That's coming from the pre-Reformation office. So the word laud means to praise, and the reason for that name was for this. at Lodge, both in the monastic and secular. Psalm 148, 149, and 150 were always said during Lodge, and that's where these psalms are songs of praise, and hence the name Lodge. So, this is the short reading I was telling you about, chapter. That's it. That's the only little reading you get from the Bible, not compared to the whole blasted thing that we would say in morning and evening lectionary. Then you have a hymn, then you have the Benedictus. Okay, so on the third hour, which is prime prayer before work, I just wanted to show you guys in here. I can't remember the exact prayer, but that looks like something that they modified for what we have in our prayer book. Yeah, this one, you should recognize that one. You recognize that in the daily office? Yeah. In fine. The Vespers. Again, you have a chapter, very short reading, and then the Magnificat that we have in the prayer book. And the Lord's Prayer. And let me go to another office so I can show you Calvin. Now there it is, 90 minutes for the evening prayer. Okay, so I hope you can see where we get a lot of these prayers that come into the prayer office. Does that make a lot more sense? So this wasn't something that Cranmer sat down and invented. He was pulling from traditional sources that have gone back, if you want to point the finger, to Jewish forms of prayer and monasticism, which grew out of the period of Martins. So that's pretty much it. That's the history of the Anglican Prayer Book, for that matter. So, anybody have any questions?
I'm just glad we don't have to pray 8 hours.
Yeah, I did for 2 weeks pray with a monastery, a Benedictine monastery, and they prayed 7 hours. They didn't pray fine, because up to that point, I think after, it was in the early 1900s, basically monastic communities suppressed prime, and they no longer prayed it, but they still prayed 7 times a day. So I had to get up at 3:30 in the morning to pray vigils. And so it's really rough. So trying to get through 150 psalms in 1 week. That's really a discipline. So I don't know how in the world you could pray 150 psalms in 1 day.
Well, you couldn't work.
What?
You couldn't work.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have a job.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine it'd take, 3-4 hours to play 150 songs, and 5 of them would bring you So, anyway, so I hope you appreciate the rich history behind the daily office. That's really good on this stuff. So.
It's evolved.
What?
It's evolved.
If what?
Evolved.
Oh, evolved, yeah, exactly right. So. And the 28 prayer book, as you guys know, really, really quickly, we have the 1549 and they come out with, there was one in 1552, eventually it came out to 1662, which is the standard Anglican prayer book. In the United States, where we have the Revolution, we had 1789 was our first prayer book, and I think it was one in the 1870s, 1880s, somewhere in there, and then in 1928, which is where we are. But basically, the differences between all these prayer books are very minor, but the basics of what we have is pretty much goes back to 1549. So there you go.
Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
is it still the Cloverdale Psalter?
What is that?
In the 1928, is it still the Cloverdale
It's still
Psalter?
the Commodore Psalter.
Because that's why you'll find it different than,
Hmm?
you'll find it different than the King James version.
Exactly, right, that's a good point. So, the Commodore Psalter is a different, translation of the Psalms than the King James version, so good point, thank you. Yeah, they'll be reading King James and they're reading the Psalm, like, well, that doesn't sound right. So, there you go. Well, thank you. And look
Thank
at
you,
that,
Dave.
covered pretty much our time. So,